The emergency regulator screamed as overheated metal twisted beneath Captain Elias Mercer's hands. One biometric confirmation could keep millions alive, but it would erase the last chance his shattered body had to heal. Across the station, Lyra Vane stood before an ancient oath system that would strip away her rank, her honor, and the only life she had ever known. Neither of them knew if either sacrifice would be enough. Welcome to Intergalactic Untold. This is the story of how an alien warrior and a wounded human changed an interstellar civilization with two irreversible choices. The distress beacon arrived without warning. 3 civilian transports had been caught between retreating fleets near a corridor gate. Their engines were failing. Their escorts were gone. Survival calculations collapsed with every passing second. Guardian Commander Lyra Vane watched tactical overlays bloom across her vision. Probability bands shifted in layered spectra that only Valkyrie combat interfaces could display. Every update painted the same conclusion. If nothing changed, thousands of civilians would die. The command channel remained calm. Maintain formation. The order carried full authority under the sacred oaths. Ahead, a battered human coalition rescue shuttle accelerated toward the collapsing convoy. Its hull already bore fresh impact scars. The flight path ignored every acceptable survival model. Inside the cockpit, Captain Elias Mercer never asked for permission. He steered straight into the kill zone. Explosions rolled across the void. Debris spun through the rescue corridor. The shuttle twisted between fragments of burning armor as external clamps locked onto the first disabled transport. Another warning erupted across Lyra's display. Civilian sections were venting atmosphere. Emergency tethers appeared along the transport's outer hull. People were trapped outside, exposed to space, waiting for a rescue that official projections said would never arrive. Elias opened the shuttle's exterior airlock. He clipped himself to a safety line. Then he stepped into open space. One survivor, then another. He pulled each person across shattered plating while the shuttle's attitude thrusters fought to hold position. Metal groaned beneath his boots. Ice crystals scattered with every impact. A nearby explosion hurled him sideways, but the tether caught. He climbed back and kept moving. Lyra watched the telemetry update again. The convoy still could not escape. The human captain was saving lives. He could not save all of them alone. Maintain formation, the command repeated. The order was lawful. The outcome was catastrophic. Lyra made her choice. Countermeasure drones broke away from her formation. Defensive screens expanded around the evacuation corridor. Incoming fires scattered as interceptor bursts disrupted missile locks just long enough for the civilian convoy to change course. The opening lasted only seconds. It was enough. The surviving transports cleared the engagement zone behind the human shuttle. By the time the battle ended, the official reports already knew what would follow. Captain Elias Mercer had disobeyed every survival calculation. Guardian Commander Lyra Vane had disobeyed a direct order. Thousands of civilians were alive. Her promotion was suspended before she returned to base. A formal investigation began before the damaged ships completed their inspections. The battle was over. The consequences had only begun. Captain Elias Mercer regained consciousness in a coalition medical annex 3 days later. The battle had ended. Recovery had not. His left leg rested inside a reinforced support brace. Regenerative therapy had repaired what it could. The damage that remained would demand months of rehabilitation. Dr. Hanasato reviewed the latest scans without hiding the truth. The treatment is working. Elias waited. But your regenerative reserve isn't unlimited. Every additional procedure reduces what you'll have later. He gave a quiet nod. I understand. You also need to submit your official statement. I will. Across the station, Guardian Commander Lyra Vane entered the same medical complex under formal authorization. Every contact with the human coalition had become evidence in the investigation. Every observation would be recorded. She expected to confirm procedural facts. Instead, she found Captain Mercer struggling through physical therapy. He rose with the support brace locked against his leg. Sweat gathered across his forehead before he completed a single measured step. Valkyric biometric overlays appeared across Lyra's vision, translating subtle changes in breathing, muscle tension, and balance into patterns no human eye could detect. The pain indicators climbed. Elias said nothing. A younger patient lost balance nearby. Before a therapist could reach him, Elias shifted his own weight, caught the man, and steadied him with the arm that still trembled from treatment. "You all right?" The patient nodded. "Thanks." Elias smiled once, then returned to his own exercises. Lyra remained where she was. The official reports had described a reckless soldier. The man before her looked different. Later that afternoon, they met inside a secure interview room. "I reviewed the battle telemetry," Lyra said. Elias waited. "I expected violations. And I found choices." He studied her expression for a moment. Sometimes that's the difference. Neither tried to persuade the other. Neither defended the battle. Facts were enough. Lyra completed her report exactly as the investigation required. She described what she had witnessed. She omitted speculation. She assigned no moral judgment beyond the verified record. When the document reached the review authority, one recommendation stood apart from the rest. Historical review request approved. Archive authority access scheduled. For the first time since the battle, Lyra believed the answers might exist somewhere beyond military procedure. The Archive Authority occupied the oldest structure still operating within the Concord. Unlike military headquarters or legislative chambers, nothing inside had been designed to impress. Every corridor served a single purpose: preserving an unbroken record of authenticated history. Guardian Commander Lyra Vane entered under the authorization granted by the investigation board. As the security lattice confirmed her identity, faint spectral patterns shimmered across her vision, marking each authenticated record linked to the archive's living network. The system verified access. It offered no opinions. Archivist Nearest Soul greeted her without ceremony. "You requested constitutional review." "I did." Nearest led her into a circular chamber where thousands of historical records rested inside suspended crystalline matrices. "The Archive Authority protects authenticity," Nearest said. Nothing more. She activated a projection. An oath appeared exactly as it had been recorded centuries earlier. "The wording has never changed," she continued. The image shifted. Generations of legal interpretations unfolded beside the original text. The interpretation did. Lyra studied both records. The archive preserved every version. It preserved every authentic version. Nearest expanded another layer of the display. Authorship. A name illuminated. Consent. The original witnesses appeared. Continuity. Every verified revision connected through an unbroken historical chain. Then the projection stopped. Lyra looked back at the original oath. Can the archive determine what its authors intended? Nearest answered without hesitation. No. Why? Because intention requires judgment. The archive authenticates evidence. It does not authenticate meaning. Silence settled over the chamber. For the first time, Lyra understood the boundary that no guardian, judge, or archivist could cross. Later that day, she requested access to Coalition mission records related to the rescue operation. Captain Elias Mercer arrived carrying the authorized files himself. He paused before entering the consultation room when he noticed a freight handler struggling with a damaged equipment cart. Without a word, Elias stepped in, helped stabilize the load, and continued on only after the cart was moving again. Lyra watched the brief exchange through the open doorway. It matched what she had already seen in the medical annex. No audience. No recognition. Simply another choice. Elias placed the mission log on the table. "This is everything my command cleared for release." Lyra accepted the data crystal. "It may not change anything." "I know. Then why bring it?" He considered the question before answering. "Because if we're asking history to tell the truth, it should have the whole record." The words lingered after the room fell quiet. Before leaving the Archive Authority, Lyra completed one final document. Petition for Constitutional Review. Nearest verified the authorship. She verified consent. She verified continuity. Nothing else. As Lyra stepped back into the station, the petition had not changed a single law. It had only begun asking whether the law had always been understood correctly. The petition entered the Constitutional Registry 2 days later. Its filing changed nothing. Not yet. The sacred oaths remained in force. Guardian authority remained intact. Military operations continued without interruption. The law had merely agreed to examine itself. Within hours, authenticated record requests began arriving at the Archive Authority from every corner of the Concord. Judges requested original rulings. Universities requested founding documents. Provincial assemblies sought centuries-old legislative records. Independent legal scholars submitted their own constitutional inquiries. Each request was valid. Each required authentication. Archivist Nearest Soul watched the processing queue expand across the archive network. An assistant glanced at the growing list. It won't stop. Nearest studied the numbers for a moment. No system processes infinite demand without consequence. The hearing opened 3 days later. Guardian Commander Lyra Vane stood before the tribunal. Captain Elias Mercer attended as an authorized witness. Seraph Kaler observed from the assembly delegation, speaking only when procedure required it. The chief adjudicator reviewed the authenticated evidence. No forgery has been identified. Another justice continued. No constitutional amendment has been introduced. A third finished the sequence. The question before this tribunal concerns interpretation. No one challenged the authenticity of the records. No one disputed the continuity of the archive. The disagreement existed only in what those preserved words required of the present. Outside the chamber, the proceedings spread rapidly through the Concord. News organizations streamed public summaries. Legal forums filled with competing analyses. Citizens searched historical records that had gone untouched for generations. Curiosity became participation. Participation became demand. Inside the Archive Authority, authentication requests continued climbing. Seraph met briefly with the infrastructure liaison after the day's hearing. Can the archive sustain this volume? It can, the liaison replied. But verification requires processing time, computing capacity, and authenticated network bandwidth. So every review carries a real cost. Yes. Seraph thanked the official and returned to the assembly without another question. The institutions were functioning exactly as they had been designed. Their limits were only beginning to appear. By the end of the week, no ruling had been issued. No law had changed. Even so, archive requests continued to multiply, quietly placing demands on systems that had always assumed constitutional review would remain an exceptional event rather than a civilization-wide undertaking. 7 Archive Authority nodes synchronized across the Concord as the tribunal prepared to issue its ruling. Authentication traffic flowed through the network in layered streams. Across Lyra Vane's vision, the archive lattice marked each completed verification with brief spectral pulses before fading into the next request. The hearing chamber remained silent as the chief adjudicator addressed the record. The historical evidence is authentic. Another justice continued. The constitutional record is continuous. A third reviewed the final finding. No alteration has been identified in the original text. The decision followed immediately. The preserved documents established what had been written. They did not establish what their authors had intended beyond those authenticated records. The petition for constitutional reinterpretation was denied. No voices rose inside the chamber. No one objected to the evidence. The ruling entered the permanent record exactly as required. Outside, the response spread faster than the decision itself. News networks reported that centuries of historical evidence had been verified. Legal analysts focused on the unchanged interpretation. Universities requested additional archive access. Regional courts reopened historical reviews connected to unrelated cases. Authentication queues lengthened again. Within days, ordinary schedules began slipping. Freight departures missed assigned windows, while verification traffic consumed network capacity reserved for authenticated civil operations. Commercial carriers accepted revised routes. Inspection appointments moved back. Administrative processing slowed across multiple systems. At the Archive Authority, Nearest Soul watched new requests arrive before completed authentications could clear the queue. Processing capacity remained stable. Demand did not. Later that evening, Lyra met Elias inside a transit concourse overlooking the departure platforms. The station felt different. Passenger announcements arrived farther apart. A cargo vessel remained docked long after its scheduled departure, while updated authentication certificates moved through the review network. Elias studied the delayed departure board. They're behind. Lyra followed the changing schedule displayed through her interface. They weren't before. Neither spoke again as another transport shifted to a later departure time. The petition had failed. Its consequences had not. 3 days after the tribunal's ruling, the effects reached places far beyond the courtroom. Supply convoys waited longer for authenticated clearance. Cargo transfers slipped behind schedule. Engineers began postponing routine inspections to keep essential systems operating. Captain Elias Mercer returned to the Coalition Rehabilitation Center after assisting with technical assessments. Dr. Hannah Sato reviewed his latest treatment plan. Recovery is still possible, she said. Elias looked at the projection. But every delay affects scheduling now. Regenerative sessions are beginning to queue behind higher priority infrastructure demands. He nodded once. I'll work around it. Across the Concorde, Guardian Commander Lyra Vane submitted a formal request to relinquish operational command while the investigation and constitutional review continued. The request surprised no one. It was approved the same day. Her Guardian standing remained intact. Her authority to command active deployments did not. No appeal followed. Inside the Archive Authority, authentication requests continued arriving faster than completed reviews could leave the network. An assistant approached Nearest Soul. The queue has doubled again. Nearest examined the updated figures. We cannot refuse a valid request. What if the delays continue? Then they continue. The answer carried no frustration. Only procedure. Outside the institutions, ordinary life adjusted one compromise at a time. Restaurant deliveries arrived late because freight schedules had shifted. University laboratories postponed experiments while specialized equipment remained in transit. Repair crews waited for certified replacement components that had not yet cleared verification. No single delay seemed extraordinary. Together, they reshaped daily routines across the Concorde. An emergency assembly session convened before the end of the week. Infrastructure directors presented updated forecasts. No constitutional process had been suspended. No public service had been abandoned. Instead, energy and processing capacity had been redistributed to sustain the unprecedented volume of authenticated legal review. The remaining margins continued to shrink. After the session, Lyra met Elias inside the Central Infrastructure Coordination Center. A vast engineering model rotated above the room, revealing maintenance corridors, synchronization regulators, and reserve distribution pathways woven throughout the corridor gate network. Several maintenance windows shifted to later dates as they watched. No alarms sounded. No dramatic announcement followed. The schedule simply changed again. Lyra traced the updated routes through the spectral overlays visible only to her interface. One postponed inspection connected to another, then another. Elias watched the same pattern emerge on the public display. Neither needed to explain what they were seeing. The system was still functioning. It was carrying less certainty than it had only a week before. And no one could restore that certainty by reversing a single decision. Mandatory inspection windows expired one after another. Under normal conditions, synchronization regulators rotated offline in carefully staggered intervals, while reserve arrays absorbed the temporary load. Weeks of postponed maintenance had erased that rhythm. Every verification request had been lawful. Every approved delay had followed established procedure. Together, they had consumed the safety margin engineers depended on. The first warning appeared inside Corridor Gate 7. It did not come from the gate itself. It came from the scheduling network coordinating everything around it. Chief Systems Engineer Arlen Cho expanded the operational display inside the regulator control spine. Layer after layer of engineering data unfolded across the room. Another overlap. A technician checked the timing sequence. All authorized. Cho nodded. Separate the queues. We've been doing that for 3 days. I know. Another indicator shifted from green to amber. Reserve compensators engaged automatically. Energy demand climbed again. Captain Elias Mercer arrived less than 20 minutes later under temporary engineering assignment. His access badge opened only the sections required for the emergency. Nothing else. Cho enlarged the structural schematic. We're not fighting damaged hardware. Elias studied the diagram. We're fighting timing. Exactly. The synchronization regulators depended on precise intervals between authenticated traffic requests. Every interruption forced microscopic corrections inside the field geometry. Each correction consumed more energy. Each correction increased mechanical stress. Can we reject any of it? Elias asked. Cho shook his head. It's all constitutional traffic. So we slow it down. We already have. A fourth regulator entered thermal protection mode. Deep beneath the deck, a low vibration rolled through the structure. Warm metal carried the scent of overheated machinery despite the cooling systems working at full capacity. Inside the Archive Authority, Nearest Soul watched authenticated requests arrive faster than completed reviews could leave the network. An assistant stepped beside her. Should we suspend lower priority reviews? Nearest examined every classification. None qualified. Judicial inquiries. Legislative reviews. Emergency certifications. Constitutional petitions. Each met the legal standard for authentication. Continue processing. The queue will keep growing. I know. Guardian Lyra Vane entered the Infrastructure Coordination Center after receiving an assembly summons. Her interface overlaid faint spectral pathways across the engineering model, revealing authentication traffic moving through systems invisible to everyone else in the room. No military briefing had prepared her for what she saw. Structural temperatures, synchronization intervals, reserve capacity, maintenance schedules. Seraph Kaler stood beside infrastructure directors, logistics coordinators, and emergency planners. The latest maintenance delay? Approved yesterday. The legal review? Still active. The archive? Still processing. Every answer matched procedure. Chief Engineer Cho interrupted the meeting through the emergency network. Control, this is Gate 7. The room fell silent. We've identified repeating synchronization patterns. Seraph looked toward the engineering feed. Equipment failure? No. Software compromise? No. Cho projected the timing analysis. Authenticated requests appeared in recurring sequences. Individually, each one was harmless. Together, they struck the regulators at precisely the wrong intervals. Someone had learned how the Concord balanced legal traffic against physical infrastructure. The pattern required no forged credentials. Only accurate knowledge. Only patience. Only a system already operating without reserve. Inspection drones withdrew as temperatures climbed beyond safe operating limits. Human crews continued instead. Elias secured a safety tether before descending toward the primary synchronization manifold. His damaged leg tightened with every rung. A warped actuator blocked the maintenance assembly. Manual release, a technician shouted. It'll seize again. It only has to hold once. They forced the locking mechanism into position together. Frost burst across the surrounding metal as emergency coolant flooded the housing. For a moment, the regulator stabilized. Then another synchronized sequence entered the queue. The entire assembly shuddered beneath their boots. Updated analysis reached the coordination center seconds later. The repeating patterns had not created the weakness. They had exposed one that already existed. Weeks of lawful delays. Weeks of postponed maintenance. Weeks of shrinking reserve margins. Without those conditions, the timing sequence would have passed unnoticed. Now it threatened the entire network. Emergency directives spread across the Concord. Commercial traffic stopped. Passenger departures were suspended. Every non-essential energy allocation froze automatically. Even then, projected stabilization continued to fall. Below the coordination center, the immense regulator rings surrounding Corridor Gate 7 rotated unevenly for the first time since their installation. The vibration deepened beneath every engineer's feet. Steady, relentless. The reserve that had protected the Concord for generations was nearly gone. The next decision would not restore it. It would decide who surrendered what remained. The emergency reserve reached its final allocation threshold before the regulator temperature stopped climbing. Nothing else could be postponed. Every discretionary system had already gone offline. Lighting, transit comfort fields, administrative computing, research arrays. Only essential loads remained. Life support, gate stabilization, medical infrastructure. Chief Systems Engineer Arlen Cho studied the final distribution map. We've exhausted every scheduled transfer. A technician recalculated the network. The numbers did not change. One reserve is still isolated. Cho gave a slow nod. It was designed to stay that way. Captain Elias Mercer crossed the regulator platform while maintenance crews replaced another warped synchronization collar. The vibration beneath the deck had settled into a steady pulse. Cho met him beside the emergency routing console. The gate holds if stabilization reaches 3%. Where are we now? 1.9. The final energy map expanded across the display. A single branch remained highlighted. Emergency regenerative reserve. Critical care systems would continue operating. Long-term regenerative energy reserved for patients with ongoing recovery programs, could be reassigned only with the informed consent of every affected patient. Most allocations were too small to matter. One was not. Captain Elias Mercer. Years of treatment had committed nearly half of the remaining reserve to his future rehabilitation. The authorization terminal recognized his identity before anyone spoke. On the upper operations level, Lyra Vane stood before the oath lattice. Its living interface shimmered across her vision, tracing every oath that had shaped her life. The display offered no guidance, only consequence. Permanent renunciation of guardian standing. Action irreversible. Military authority. Protected lineage. Institutional inheritance. Future command. Each would disappear the moment the lattice authenticated her decision. The tribunal had already verified that a civil marriage remained lawful only after every oath consequence had been accepted in full. Seraph Kaler entered the chamber and stopped a respectful distance away. I cannot advise you. I know. If you proceed, neither the assembly nor I can restore what you surrender. I know. He looked once toward the engineering status display, then back to the oath lattice. He did not reach for the authorization token. It no longer belonged to him. Below, Elias opened his medical record. Projected rehabilitation extended years into the future. Additional nerve recovery. Joint preservation. Adaptive regenerative maintenance. Without the reserve, those treatments would end forever. He read the authorization twice. Then he pressed his thumb against the biometric field. Consent verified. A second confirmation appeared. Transfer irreversible. He confirmed again. The routing diagram changed immediately. No new energy entered the system. Existing reserve flowed from long-term medical allocation into emergency gate stabilization through the shared emergency grid. The engineering display climbed. 2.1, 2.4, 2.8. Still below target. Still rising. Cho looked at Elias. You've ended your recovery. Elias picked up the next locking tool. We've bought time. The additional reserve allowed engineers to restart one synchronization regulator before thermal deformation became permanent. Maintenance crews secured the repaired assembly. Field oscillation slowed. The stabilization reading reached 3%. The vibration beneath the platform eased. Controlled. Not finished. Lyra placed her hand upon the oath lattice. Identity confirmed. Consent confirmed. Continuity confirmed. The system authenticated the choice. Nothing more. I accept permanent renunciation. The ceremonial oath markings across her wrists faded until they matched ordinary skin. Encrypted guardian channels disappeared one by one. Her command registry dissolved. Security credentials expired. The final record appeared. Guardian standing, permanently relinquished. The authorization token fractured into pale crystalline fragments inside the reader. No one applauded. No one intervened. The record simply became permanent. Across the operations center, continuous warning tones faded into intermittent status signals. Commercial traffic remained suspended. Weeks of reconstruction still lay ahead. The uncontrolled phase drift had ended. Engineers immediately began planning permanent repairs. The tribunal reconvened before emergency operations concluded. Its ruling reflected only verified facts. Lyra Vane no longer belonged to the Sacred Oath Order. Captain Elias Mercer had permanently surrendered the regenerative reserve assigned to his future recovery. No constitutional question remained unresolved. The registrar authenticated their identities, their consent, their legal standing. 2 signatures entered the permanent civil record. Outside the chamber, repair crews continued replacing damaged regulator assemblies while the first stable power readings spread across the Concord. Lyra found Elias among the engineers instead of the officials. Neither reached for celebration. Together, they turned toward the reconstruction reports waiting beyond the emergency, knowing the future would be built the same way the system had been saved, one irreversible choice at a time. Several months later, reconstruction had become the Concord's new routine. Engineering crews reopened the first maintenance corridor 42 days after the emergency. The full recovery plan stretched across many more months. Entire regulator assemblies were dismantled, inspected, rebuilt, and certified before commercial traffic could return to normal capacity. No official promised a quick recovery. The projections would not allow it. Freight captains adjusted their routes. Manufacturers rebuilt production schedules around slower deliveries. Universities staggered academic terms while professors and students waited for delayed transport between member worlds. Life moved forward anyway. Captain Elias Mercer retired from active military service before the Coalition Medical Board required him to. His final evaluation offered no comforting predictions. The regenerative program had ended forever. Muscles that might once have grown stronger now demanded constant discipline simply to preserve what remained. He learned which station corridors required fewer stairs. He accepted a cane without pretending he would no longer need it. When younger technicians struggled to maneuver replacement field coils through narrow maintenance shafts, Elias coordinated the lift instead of insisting on carrying the weight himself. The adjustment came quietly. It became part of who he was. Lyra Vane entered the Hall of Civic Records through the same public entrance used by every visitor. The security lattice recognized an ordinary civilian identity. Soft spectral patterns crossed her vision for an instant before fading away. Guardian privileges no longer accompanied them. Inside, historians, engineers, judges, and students studied the tribunal's final ruling together. The constitutional text remained unchanged. So did the authenticated historical record. The reform appeared elsewhere. Future constitutional interpretations would require two independent findings before becoming binding: fidelity to the preserved historical language and documented civic consequences supported by public evidence. The Archive Authority still preserved history. The courts still interpreted law. Each retained its own responsibility. Neither would ignore the other again. Archivist Nearest Soul reviewed the final publication one last time before applying the certification seal. The record had been preserved. The process had evolved. Seraph Kaler requested a final meeting, not as High Chancellor, as the mentor who had once taught a young guardian to trust institutions without ever mistaking them for perfection. They met beneath the Foundation vault where fragments of the Concorde's first charter rested behind protective glass. He placed a small wooden case between them. Inside lay Lyra's former guardian insignia. Its authentication core had been removed. "It won't open a single door," Seraph said. Lyra lifted it gently. "I know. It shouldn't." She closed the case. Some things belonged in memory rather than authority. The public registration of their marriage took place after the Reconstruction Commission certified the first corridor gate for limited civilian service. Attendance exceeded every expectation. Agreement did not. Former guardians stood beside families rescued during the convoy evacuation. Engineers shared benches with legislators. Some guests applauded when the registrar completed the final declaration. Others remained silent, their expressions unchanged. No one attempted to stop the ceremony. The marriage entered the civil registry exactly as the law required. No exception had been created for them. None had been necessary. Later that afternoon, the first passenger convoy departed through the restored gate. Transit remained slower than before. Safety margins were wider. Inspection intervals were longer. Children waved through the observation glass as the lead transport disappeared into the corridor. Their parents kept watching the engineering status display until the successful transit confirmation appeared. Only then did conversations begin again. Elias stood among the maintenance crews instead of the invited dignitaries. His cane rested against one shoulder while engineers discussed the next reconstruction phase around him. Lyra found him there. No announcement. No ceremony. Just another ordinary moment earned at an extraordinary cost. Together, they watched workers preparing the next regulator assembly for installation. More repairs waited ahead. More debates. More elections. More inspections. The future would demand patience instead of certainty. Behind them remained two choices that could never be reversed. Ahead of them, another convoy prepared to depart beneath the steady light of a rebuilt corridor gate. This time, the path forward belonged to everyone. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. If saving millions meant permanently giving up the future you had planned, would you make the same choice as Lyra or Elias? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Galactic Contact for more unforgettable journeys among the stars.